Brought to you by Penguin.
Her Fearful Symmetry by Audrey Niffenegger. Read by Sian Thomas. Elspeth died while Robert was standing in front of a vending machine, watching tea shoot into a small plastic cup. Later he would remember walking down the hospital corridor with a cup of horrible tea in his hand, alone under the fluorescent lights, retracing his steps to the room where Elspeth lay, surrounded by machines. She had turned her head towards the door, and her eyes were open. At first Robert thought she was conscious. In the seconds before she died, Elspeth remembered a day last spring when she and Robert had walked along a muddy path by the Thames in Kew Gardens. Robert said, "We should have had kids," and Elspeth replied, "Don't be silly, sweet." She said it out loud in the hospital room, but Robert wasn't there to hear. Elspeth turned her face towards the door. She wanted to call out, "Robert," but her throat was suddenly full. She felt as though her soul were attempting to climb out by way of her esophagus. She tried to cough, to let it out, but she only gurgled, "I'm drowning. Drowning in a bed." She felt intense pressure, and then she was floating. The pain was gone, and she was looking down from the ceiling at her small, wrecked body. Robert stood in the doorway. The tea was scalding his hand, and he set it down on the nightstand by the bed. Dawn had begun to change the shadows in the room from charcoal to an indeterminate grey. Otherwise everything seemed as it had been. He shut the door. Robert took off his round, wire-rimmed glasses and his shoes. He climbed into the bed, careful not to disturb Elspeth, and folded himself around her. Elspeth watched him from the ceiling. How familiar he was to her, and how strange he seemed. Everything about him was elongated, his face all jaw and large upper lip. He had a slightly beakish nose and deep-set eyes. His brown hair spilled over her pillow. He looked so desolate, thin and enormous, spooned around her tiny, slack body. All the regrets and guilts and longings of her life came over her. "No," she thought, "I won't go." But she was already gone, and in a moment she was elsewhere, scattered nothingness. Outside, London was waking up. Robert knew that soon he would have to open his eyes, let go of Elspeth's body. Soon there would be the future, without Elspeth. The letters arrived every 2 weeks. They did not come to the house. Every second Thursday, Valentina Poole drove 6 miles to the Highland Park post office, 2 towns away from her home in Lake Forest. She had a P.O. box there, a small one. There was never more than 1 letter in it. Usually she took the letter to Starbucks and read it. Sometimes, if she was in a hurry, Edie read the letter in her car. After she read it, she drove to the parking lot behind the hot dog stand on 2nd Street, parked next to the dumpster, and set the letter on fire. "Why do you have a cigarette lighter in your glove compartment?" her husband, Jack, asked her. "I'm bored with knitting. I've taken up arson," Edie had replied. He let it drop. Jack knew this much about the letters because he paid a detective to follow his wife. The detective reported no meetings, phone calls, or email, no suspicious activity at all except the letters. The detective did not report that Edie had taken to staring at him as she burned the letters, then grinding the ashes into the pavement with her shoe. Once she'd given him the Nazi salute. He had begun to dread following her. The last letter arrived at the beginning of December. Edie retrieved it from the post office and drove to the beach in Lake Forest. She parked in the spot farthest from the road. It was a windy, bitterly cold day. Lake Michigan was brown. Little waves lapped the edges of the rocks. The parking lot was deserted except for Edie's Honda Accord. She kept the motor running. The detective hung back, then sighed and pulled into a spot at the opposite end of the park.
Sample complete.
Ready to continue?